Hold that. At this time, I would like to convene the Arlington Independent School District Board of Trustees Workshop Meeting on May 21st, 2026 at 5:33 p.m. Given that this is a workshop for our trustees and there are no items on the agenda for action, we will not have public comments this evening. Before we begin, I wanted to go ahead and point out we do have a couple trustees missing. Tonight, Trustee McMurrow is attending her son's 6th grade graduation and hopes to join us at some point this evening. And then Trustee Chapa is also at end of year activities for his student, and so he will also be joining us. For tonight's agenda, the first workshop item this evening is our Treasury 2A, Population and Survey Analyst Demographer Report.
Trustees, thank you for being here 2 nights in a row. Appreciate a good meeting last night, and then tonight a really great meeting with some guests here. In the first portion of the meeting, we'll be going over our demographic study with PASA. Chris Poole and Caroline Crouch are here tonight to walk us through their study of Arlington ISD. We are doing it in here to make sure that we have a really good recording. We know this is super important information for not only you all, but for our community moving forward. And we wanted to make sure we got a good recording and also had the ability to have clear microphone access for everyone. When we use the other rooms, sometimes we don't. We are going to be in here for this, but we encourage you all to treat this as a workshop. We want this to be as much dialogue as possible. This is a great time to hear these experts and what they found for Arlington ISD on our demographic study, and to ask them as many questions as you can. That doesn't mean that they won't come back. I know that they'll come back if we need them to come back and answer more questions in the future, but please make sure that we ask questions along the way. We will, I think Frank and them will help us out in a minute. We're going to make sure that everybody's microphone is on so that you have just access to interject and ask questions along the way. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris and Caroline. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you very much. Got to make sure that mine's on. Sounds like it. So good evening, board members and Dr. Smith. We appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. We hope to walk through a little bit about that 400-page binder. I think everybody's got a copy of the binder there in front of you. I want you to read it all tonight before you go to bed. We have actually shrunk the size of our binders and printed them both front and back and everything, and we were so proud about how it seemed much more user-friendly until we got to Arlington, and then it weighs 12 pounds or something. So. Anyway, so we're going to walk through the presentation tonight. I do have Caroline Couch here. She is the demographer that worked on some of the housing projections for the study. And so we are going to try to take some time with it because there's a lot of detail to it. We could really get into a lot of detail. It's always a difficulty of, of brevity and detail when you're walking through. So I hope that you all like what we've picked out for tonight. And let's go ahead and get started. So the first slide here just shows the tiniest bit, and we wanted to show everybody's faces to you guys. You see the two of us, but there are about a dozen of us, and pretty well everybody touches the project along the way. And so the staff members, the admin, have gotten emails from probably 8 or 10 of the people here, but there are additional faces behind that 400 pages. It's not just the two of us here. And then the study itself, our process takes normally about 4 months. It's a very lengthy process, starts with that person number 1 and ends up with kind of person number 12 there at the end. We start with collecting state and district data, with a lot of background data, and we collect that even when we come back to a district that we have worked for before. There's data out there that we can get our hands on that gives us an understanding of what's going on here down in the weeds for Arlington ISD. But then another really, really important thing that we do is we build a very robust GIS map. And I have heavy copies of them here that are about 3 feet by 3 feet. We've got about a dozen copies of them. It starts with parcel data and floodplain data and land use data, all of the schools, and we draw on a lot of detail, and it's very important to us so that everybody's on the same page and understands what we're talking about. And so we do have copies of that. There are copies on smaller pages there in Chapter 3 of the report. They're actually in the appendix. Another thing very important that we do is geocode your student population. I believe we geocoded 3 data sets for you guys. It's important not only to understand where your kids are now, but also where they were a couple of years ago. That way we can do things like look at a particular subdivision and look how many K to 4th graders became 1st through 5th graders the next year. So we can understand what's going on inside those existing subdivisions. You guys at this point are very different than you were earlier in your life cycle as a school district, or very different than some of the districts that are in sort of the growth ring that we'll talk about here in just a second, in that most of the kiddos you have are in older subdivisions, in existing subdivisions, and there are different things that go on there. Another thing that we do with those geocoded students is we determine a ratio of students per home. For the areas where you do have additional places to build out, we need to know how many kiddos we think are going to be in there. And it's not just kids, it's students in Arlington ISD. And so we literally count homes and count students and create a ratio there, and then we can use those ratios elsewhere. The middle one here is analyzing alternative educational opportunities. We call them AEOs. We used to call them charter schools, but there's so much else that goes into that now. We call them AEOs. And so you will hear us talk about that quite a bit. I highly encourage you guys to look in Appendix 2. There is about a 40 or 50 page cluster of paperwork where we have downloaded data, collected data. There's state data, there's region data, and then there's tons and tons of data. We even altered some of it after we talked to the administration about a week or so ago to try to make it a little more specific to Arlington ISD. So I really encourage you guys to take a look at that because it is very, very important. And I think that the data there you will find very, very interesting. Of course, we do have to look at housing and economic trends. There is still a little bit of infill going on here. And then we generate district-wide enrollment projections, and then we look at what that means for you guys moving forward and comparing it to the capacities of your schools. So you guys have passed the high growth phase of our enrollment growth for the district. You guys are sort of where we would talk about stabilization and some decline. And so we'll look here in just a minute at how that is occurring in the region, but this is sort of a normal growth cycle, a demographic life cycle for school districts as housing is built, new housing is built, lots of kiddos come in the door, and then at some point people end up staying. I have 2 kids, we're still in the same house, and so my kids are not in the school district anymore, they're in college, and that's sort of what happens. So we'll start a little bit here first with some demographic trends and just a little bit of discussion about what all is going on in the region and in the state. And so these maps here look at the enrollment from 2019 to 2025. Normally we would do a 5-year enrollment change, but that would put us at 2020 with COVID, and the data looks like a mess. And so we did 2019 to 2025 for your region. And you might imagine Region 10 flipped over to its side there for Dallas. It's sort of a mirror image. And if we had the two together, what we would see is blue in the middle and red on the outside. And what it means is blue for the decline that is going on in the Dallas and the Fort Worth and the Arlington and all of your neighbors. And all of that growth is being pushed out to this red sort of growth ring. And so on the left-hand side, we've got numeric enrollment change. On the right-hand side, we've got percent enrollment change. The numeric, of course, you're probably much more familiar with. You can see Northwest ISD, for example, is in the dark maroon there, sort of north and west of you guys, with the largest gain over that 6-year time frame at 7,700 kids. On the right-hand side is the percent change, and it's so much easier for the smaller districts to get a higher percent change because it doesn't take as many students moving in. And so you can see that the red shifts a little bit to where you have the smaller districts, the Argyles and Aubreys and Garners, that sort of a thing. But in both situations, of course, Arlington ISD and its neighbors are losing students in there in the blue. For Region 11 as a whole, for a 1-year enrollment change in this past year, the region lost 8,223 students. And that's a lot. I think that's a big number to hear and to understand. 34 school districts gained students and gained a total of 3,300 kids. And 41 of the districts in the region lost a total of 11,547 kids. And so that's really the story. We've given now 2 talks at Tassa Tasby and Tassa Midwinter about where all the kids have gone. And so that's a big story that everybody is talking about this year. When we drill down and look at the data a little bit for Arlington ISD in particular, you can see the left-hand side is the enrollment itself as it's been sort of marching downward. The district in 2015 was showing about 63,000 students, and of course that's about 12,000 students off for where we are now. 10-year change, about 12,000, 5-year change, 5,700. So really it's been fairly evenly split if we're looking at, how it's sort of marched downward. On the right-hand side, by year, you can see the change. And of course, that giant bar in the middle is COVID. The state lost 2.1% of the student population that year. There were only a handful of districts in the state that continued to actually gain any kids that year. We expected them to largely come back, and a whole lot of them did not. And so really and truly what we have needed to do now is we almost need to look at data that's only sort of post-COVID, because there have been so many changes that happened in 2020 there. So after you guys saw that rebound, though, the rebound that you saw, it showed itself in less loss in 21 and in 22. Also in 22, they did not come back the next year. They came back also some that second year. So for the last 3 years there, you can see that for 23 and for 24, the decline here was about 1,400 students in both of those years. But for this year, it was about 2,200 kids. And so there was about a 700 or 800 student swing. And so this next couple of slides, I think, is largely going to explain some of that. So the state as a whole, we've got state data on the left-hand side, and we've got Arlington ISD on the right-hand side. And something interesting happened with the students by ethnicity for this past year in particular. The state as a whole declined 76,613 kids this year. And that was certainly the largest decline that we could find anywhere. ISDs themselves, the traditional ISDs, declined about 88,000 students, while your charter schools in the district, in the state, gained 11,100. Really almost 11,200. And so the state overall lost that 76,000 kids, and the Hispanic student population declined by 61,700 students. So almost all of that decline can be explained by this decline in Hispanic student population that occurred here in this 1 year time frame. And so you guys saw very similar things here. These are the state and Arlington ISD totals over time. You can see how things have either trended up or trended down, but I think that perhaps the more interesting slide is here, where you can see the sort of up and down by bar graph and by group. The state of Texas at the top, Arlington ISD on the bottom, and you can see on the left-hand side for Arlington, there has been a continued sort of a continued loss for Asian student population. On the far right-hand side, a continued loss for the white student population. For the Black or African American student population, the last 3 years have shown some decline. But for that Hispanic student population, really besides COVID, this was the first year that we saw a big change there, and it was about 700 students, which is almost that differential between your 1,400 that you were down and the 2,200 that you were down this year. Most of that seemed to be in the Hispanic student population. So that is, certainly we would assume it would have to do with immigration changes and everything that was going on this year in the country. Another thing that's very important for us to all understand, and you've probably seen news articles and heard all about this, is the births and the kindergarten enrollment. And I'm sure you've heard and read articles about declining birth rates. And so here we've got, we can't knock on doors and say, how many kindergartners, how many 2-year-olds have you got inside? We know how many kindergartners, how many 2- and 3-year-olds are inside your house, of course. But what we can do is we can get at the birth rate, the number of births by zip code of the birth mother from the state. And the zip codes, if you're familiar with them, don't quite exactly line up with the state, but we massage that data using some population points to try to get a good fit. And we take the births and we move them forward 5 years and line them up with your kindergarten enrollment, so we can say, how is it trending? And then what might it do over the next couple of 3 or 4 years? And so that's what you've got at the top here. Where we are right now is where that dashed line is. And so you can see that the birth rate, the data there is shown for about 3 or 4 years. And you can see just a general downward trend in both the kindergarten enrollment and the birth rate. They have trended closely together. And so we would expect that to be a pretty good indicator moving forward. Now, your kindergarten enrollment is lower than your birth rate, and that happens for tons of districts that are largely built out. that are in those later phases of that sort of demographic life cycle. In a district that is growing very rapidly with new housing, we will see the reverse. Your kindergarten enrollment will be on top because you'll have new homes and you'll have somebody that moves in with a 3-year-old that wasn't born in that zip code. But over time, they slowly get together, and then that kindergarten enrollment drops, especially now, drops below the birth rate because there's so many other AEOs where everybody where parents are choosing to send their kids. So you can see the data that's broken down by the region. There are little oddities that you'll see, and if you ever see anything that looks weird, it's normally 2020 and COVID. But you've got Region 11, and then, of course, the state of Texas with general downward trends over time. So we'll hit a little bit on past and current students. I mentioned that we had geocoded about 3 of your data sets. And so these are 2 laid on top of each other, 23-24 and 25-26. And so there's nothing as remarkable here in some areas where, there's an area that's growing very, very rapidly, a giant master plan community. You can see all of these red dots that show up all of a sudden in addresses that were not there 2 years ago. For you guys, it's a little bit of sporadic numbers there, but sometimes people don't stop and think about all of the density and all of the students when they show up like little dots there on your map, but that's what your kiddos look like. And then this slide is very colorful, and I always find it normally find it very interesting for a district, and for you guys, I do think it is very interesting. What we've done here is for each year, we have color-coded the size of the cohort from K through 8 and from 10 through 12. We'll leave out 9th grade because there's all sorts of oddities in 9th grade. And we've color-coded them by size such that your smallest ones are in the dark navy and your largest ones are in that dark maroon. Other people say red, but I'm from College Station, so it's my Aggie maroon. And so what that shows for like 25-26 is that your 2 smallest cohorts are kindergarten and 1st grade, and your largest is presently 10th grade with 11th grade and 12th grade right behind it. And so what you can see as you work backwards to 2016 is that you've got a cluster of kiddos in the high school level that have been those largest cohorts all the way back. And so they are working their way through the system. And so over the next several years, they will exit. And so if absolutely nothing else happened except you had a small kindergarten class come in and those large high school classes leave, you would experience loss just from that if nothing else occurred. And so what you'll see later on in the projections is that the high school decline is much more significant. The one that we're projecting is much more significant than, say, the elementary decline, because you've got this cohort of kids. You've got this really heavy, dense cluster of students that are in high school grades right now. Then the other thing that is important to look at here that I always start to check is that differential between 12th grade and kindergarten. And so if you look at, say, the fall of if you look at 2018, 2019, go all the way down to the bottom, your smallest class was your 12th grade class at 3,800 kids, almost 3,900. The next year in 2019, you had 3,956 kindergartners come in. So by that graduating and that coming in, just by aging those kids forward, by when you actually picked up some kids, right? But in several years, you were either picking up or you were pretty even. But if you look here more recently, say 23-24, you had 3,600 12th graders leave, and you had fewer than 3,400 kindergartners come in. So you had that differential of a couple of hundred students. Same sort of thing between 24 and 25. By doing absolutely nothing else than just letting your kids graduate and age and matriculate through the system, you lost about 500 students. Just with that alone. And so that also is factoring into all of the numbers that you guys are seeing. The kindergarten classes are so small. And right now, you have a particularly heavy bunch of high school kids. And so that is affecting all of your overall enrollment numbers. So I mentioned the ratios of students per home that we do generate. Now, it will be in Appendix 1, I guess it is, where we actually detail every single subdivision and every single apartment complex and tell you what the ratios of students per home are for all of those. But district-wide, it's for single-family homes, it's a 0.39, and for the multifamily homes, it's a 0.27. Now, I've worked like for Frisco ISD since 1999, that sort of a thing. And so for some of our traditional suburban, in the growth ring sort of areas, those ratios for single family might be in the 0.6s, something like that. And at the same time, a lot of times that multifamily may be at about a 0.17 or 0.19 because brand new multifamily units have a really low ratio because they're pricey. They've got 3 swimming pools and they've got 2 gyms and they've got granite and the countertops and whatever. And so that's not where parents with kids can afford to live. And so these are the ratios that are here in the district right now. And so we use specific ratios. We don't just use the 0.39 and the 0.27. We use specific ones when we're going forward and projecting for the students that will be in any of the new homes. At the top part there on the right-hand side, we've broken it down to existing subdivisions and developing subdivisions. And you've got so many of the existing subdivisions that that number is also a 0.39. But for your developing subdivisions, anything that's building new, which is a ton of townhomes and things like that, for example, that Caroline will talk about later, that ratio is a 0.26. And so it's not that you're getting a 0.6 or a 0.7 in most of these new homes. It's a lower ratio actually in these developing subdivisions that we're seeing come in. And then on the left-hand side, we've also analyzed it by age. And really, you have to get to the homes that are sort of in the 1970s era before you see that ratio really hop up a little bit and not be that 0.39. And so you can see that with some age there, those ratios do go ahead and go up. We also broke them down just by median value. And a lot of times we actually do see sort of an inverse bell. We considered taking it down to one more bar of $1 million and plus homes. A lot of times, actually, the ratio of students per home in the most expensive homes actually will go up a little bit because they're not as concerned about paying for college for 4 kids, for those larger homes. And so they can have more kiddos there. And so you get more kids in the really high-end homes and then also in the cheapest value homes there. So I keep talking about and teasing alternative educational opportunities, and it's such an important part. I remember the very first time I heard of a charter school, I thought, well, this will be kind of annoying to deal with. And now we have about 1.5 persons that do nothing other than charter schools and private schools and all of these alternative educational opportunities. So we have mapped, you can see Arlington ISD there in the middle, and we have mapped the charter schools and the private schools that we know of that have Arlington ISD students in them. The data that we can get for the charter schools is from TEA, and it's pretty good. Now they mask numbers here, how many ninth graders you have, maybe mask, and how many second graders. But by and large, the data we think coming from TEA is pretty good. We have to do a lot to it. But we think we have a good process there to try to understand where your students are going into which charter schools. The private schools, it's harder to get at, but we do have some data here from Dadience IQ that's going to be on the next slide. I know you guys are working with them. The map here is very busy. I know you guys know that you are very heavily affected by charter schools and private schools here. The good news is that we do not know of any additional charter schools that are coming in, and we are constantly monitoring all of news reports, but also definitely the amendments that are released by TEA all of the time. The difficulty there is a lot of times they're very broad. We're going to allow a charter school at somewhere in the northwestern portion of and proximity is very important for this because normally there's no transportation provided. So we do know of 4 schools that are coming in. One actually does sit in the district, but it's a small one that is normally tied with like a treatment center, a treatment group, and so we're talking little tiny numbers of kids. The other 3 that we know of are outside the confines of the district itself, and so we wouldn't expect more than 1 or 2 students for any of those to go there. So right now, IL Texas is seeming to take about 1,800 students from Arlington ISD, Uplift Education about 1,400 students. And so, these are our big numbers that we'll be talking about here. Private school, we are estimating about 3,100 students to attend private schools, and that also is about the number that Dadience IQ came up with. And so I know you guys are working with them, and that is doing some geofencing of cell phones and trying to track down where those kids are going and where they're coming from. And so the data that we have here that we have mapped is their private school information. And so we can see on the left-hand side that where they're showing the private schools, a lot of these are 1s and 2s. And so it's probably there's a private school near where mom or dad work, and they take the child, and even though it may be 35 minutes away or something like that, they take them with them. In the middle, we have taken that Dadience data and gotten it down to the planning unit level planning unit level, Caroline will mention this in a minute, is the planning units are little puzzle pieces. They're just sort of how we organize all of our data. And so you can see in the darker maroon there, where you have the heaviest concentration, we think, of students that are leaving to go to private schools. And then on the right-hand side there, we can see where the private schools are, and the circles themselves are color code or sized based on how many students we think are leaving from Arlington ISD to those private schools. And so you can see that if you laid the map in the middle and the map on the right-hand side on top of each other, that for the most part, those kids are going to private schools that are pretty close by to where they live. We're always asked about homeschooling, and unfortunately enough, the state doesn't maintain much data on that. And so the way homeschoolers show up to us is in a lower ratio of students per home. So if you had a home that would have normally had 2 kids in it, but now all of a sudden they're homeschooling, now that home counts as 0 students when we're trying to develop that ratio of students per home. And so I have seen throughout all of the work I have done this fall in particular, I guess it's not, I guess we're in May, the entire year's worth of work that I have done for clients, all of the ratios of students per home have gone down. Because we have a lot of clients we do this for every single year, and we measure those ratios every year, and they have, on average, they have gone down 0.02 students per single family home this 1 year. In 1 year's time. And so that's how the homeschoolers show up. Charter schools show up that same way, private schools, virtual schools, all of those things. But homeschooling, we don't have a particular number for. It's just sort of mixed in there in those lower ratios. But what we can get at is for sure is the data from TEA. And so what we've got here is what TEA is showing us as out from Arlington ISD into charters, that's in the navy, and so you can see that over time, to other ISDs in the maroon. And then the green is the virtuals. And the percent increase in virtuals, of course, has really, really come on. And the difficulty there for a school district is a virtual program in Georgia can enroll one of your kids. Whereas we're talking proximity for private schools and for charter schools, the virtual schools, all bets are off. And so that is really coming online, and we're really interested to watch the growth in that occur. That sort of snaky line at the bottom, that is the students that are transferring in to Arlington ISD from elsewhere. And so that is sort of offset by that maroon where you're losing students to other ISDs. The district does net students in that little swap there. And so when we get to sort of a summary, then what we're looking at is resident students, charter, virtual, private, other ISDs, and then attending and residing in the district. We think that you're sort of capturing, that you're actually enrolling about 78.4% of the students that reside in Arlington ISD. And so that number varies. I'm always asked, so what is that? What's everybody else got? And it varies wildly depending on what sort of district and where they're situated that I'm working for or analyzing. And so we did Dallas ISD in 21-22, and the number for them was about 71%. I highly suspect it's gone down a little bit since then, because everybody's number has gone down a little bit since then. When we're working out in a rural area where there aren't very many charters or there aren't many privates, then of course the school district is capturing maybe 95% or so of the student population. So with that, I'm going to let Caroline talk about economy and housing, and then we'll talk about projections.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, board members. As we jump into the housing section here, we like to just kind of take a look at the broader market conditions that shape the residential development across your region. So according to the Texas Real Estate Research Center, the Arlington housing market has continued to cool a little bit over the past year. Year-over-year home sales declined about 15.6%, and median home prices softened slightly to around $322,000, down from about $330,000 the previous year. At the same time, your mortgage rates have remained elevated despite some Federal Reserve actions continuing to impact affordability and slowing buyer activity a little bit. Actually, as of the Fed's April 2026 meeting, benchmark rates were held steady at the 3.5 to 3.75 range, and this is marking their third consecutive pause. So we're continuing to keep an eye on that as the year goes on. Now, inventory remains relatively constrained at about 2.8 months, which suggests that the market is slowing, but it's not oversupplied. Now, these conditions point to a more measured housing environment moving forward, though additional rate reductions in the future could help reaccelerate buyer demand and some residential development activity. Now, the planning units, as Chris mentioned, we have this framework that we do for every district that we work for. We use small geographic areas and organize and analyze localized growth patterns across your district. Now, each unit may contain one or more housing developments or undeveloped land parcels. These boundaries are created using a combination of major roadways, attendance zones, parcel ownership patterns, and other physical features in your district. And it allows us to more accurately track where residential growth is occurring and how it may impact different parts of the district over time. So single-family development is expected to play a relatively limited role in AISD's future housing outlook, which is consistent with an urban district that is nearing full build-out and with very little undeveloped land remaining. Overall, only about 22% of all the projected new housing occupancies over the next decade are expected to come from single-family developments. So rather than large master plan communities, most of the future growth in the district is anticipated to occur through smaller infill projects that are scattered throughout the district. A handful of developments, including the Jefferson Kirby Brook Townhomes, the Rolling Hills development, Green Oaks Preserve, and the River Central project up in the north, these represent the most impactful remaining single-family projects, though even these are pretty modest in scale compared to some of the more fast-growth suburban districts in that maroon growth ring that Chris mentioned. Now, outside of these sites, most of the active and planned projects are expected to contribute less than 50 units, reinforcing that Arlington's future housing growth will be driven by this smaller incremental redevelopment and infill development opportunities rather than major subdivisions. Now, this slide just kind of highlights those largest remaining single-family projects like I just mentioned. Most of the highlighted projects are scattered along Arlington's outer edges and redevelopment corridors. You've got the River Central Townhomes and the Jefferson Kirby Brook Townhomes located on the eastern and northern sides of the district, Rolling Hills in North Arlington, and California Meadows and Green Oak Preserve located further west. So these heat maps just reinforce the same pattern that I just mentioned, that Arlington's single-family growth remains modest, scattered, and tied primarily to that infill and redevelopment activity. So in the near term, in the map on the left-hand side, this is the first 5 years of the projection period. Most of the activity is concentrated in a handful of projects, led primarily by those Jefferson Kirby Brook Townhomes, the Rolling Hills redevelopment in North Arlington, and then over some time, as we move into the right-hand side map where you show the full 10 years, some of the planned projects shift into these later years of the forecast due to some timing uncertainties and infrastructure constraints, particularly around River Central, where floodplain considerations may affect some development pacing and phasing. But the single-family outlook remains characterized by this site-specific projects just spread across your community, which is, again, typical for a mature urban district. So while single-family growth in AISD is relatively limited, multifamily continues to be the primary driver of new housing activity in the district. As a largely built-out urban district, Arlington's growth is increasingly coming through denser, more vertical residential development rather than a traditional subdivision. Currently, or at least at the time of the study, the district had 1 property leasing, 4 actively developing multifamily communities, and a substantial pipeline of planned and also potential projects concentrated along major corridors in some of these redevelopment areas. Projects like Inova Highlands, Arlington Villas, the Jefferson Southwest Parkway, and Preston multifamily projects are expected to contribute significant near-term occupancy growth. Multifamily housing is projected to account for nearly 75% of all new housing occupancies over the next decade, really focusing in on how Arlington's transition towards apartments, townhomes, and mixed-use residential growth will be within its existing urban footprint. Now, this slide is something a little bit new. We don't typically do this for all of our districts, but we thought this was going to be really important to highlight for Arlington ISD and specifically for this region. This slide highlights the potential long-term impact of Texas Senate Bill 840, which was passed just recently during the 89th Texas legislative session and became effective in September 2025. This legislation represents a significant shift in how redevelopment may occur in large Texas cities by expanding opportunities for by-right multifamily and mixed-use redevelopment on qualifying office, commercial, light industrial, and retail properties. So a key component of the law is that qualifying projects may move forward without traditional rezoning hearings or city council approvals, provided that they meet established development standards. In practical terms, this lowers the barriers for redevelopment and creates more opportunities for underutilized commercial corridors and aging employment areas to transition into residential or mixed-use environments over time. Now, for Arlington ISD, this is particularly important because the district is already largely built out. So unlike those fast growth suburban districts that can continue expanding outward with large new subdivisions, Arlington's housing growth is expected to be, like I mentioned, that redevelopment, that infill, and those more scattered projects. So while the full impacts of SB 840 are still uncertain, especially since the law is still pretty new and the multifamily market has experienced a little bit of cooling in this last year, the legislation still could become important long-term catalysts for housing activity within the district. So to better understand where this type of redevelopment is most likely to occur, we analyzed qualifying zoning patterns pulled from the City of Arlington zoning map as well as Grand Prairie zoning maps, and kind of analyze them over the entire district. So the north sector, primarily everything north of I-30, contains the highest concentration of eligible land, with about 26% of this sector meeting qualifying zoning criteria. The central sector, everything between I-30 and I-20, has a lot of redevelopment corridors along areas like Collins Street, Abrams Street, Division Street, and portions of the entertainment district, where about 14% of the sector could potentially be affected. Smaller but still notable opportunities also exist in the south sector, which is everything south of I-20, and this will occur close to I-20 and around Green Oaks Boulevard. Now, overall, while SB 840 is unlikely to create any immediate large-scale changes overnight, it does introduce a new long-term redevelopment pathway that Arlington ISD will need to monitor closely, as it could gradually reshape where future housing and ultimately future students are located throughout the district. So as we wrap up the housing section, this here is just going to summarize everything of the housing outlook, a lot of nice numbers and graphs for you. The district is projected to add just over 9,000 new housing occupancies within the decade, with multifamily development overwhelmingly driving this future growth. It's going to be about 75% of all new housing units, reflecting Arlington's mature development pattern and increasing reliance on that redevelopment, that infill, and those higher density housing options. Single-family development is expected to make up only about 21% of future occupancies, with growth occurring primarily through some scattered infill projects rather than large subdivisions. We also expect annual housing occupancies to peak in the earlier years of the projection period, around years 3 and 4, before gradually moderating over time as remaining development opportunities become a lot more limited. So when we put all of this together, a few clear themes emerge from AISD's housing outlook. First, the district is largely in that stabilization phase, with Arlington already approximately 94 to 97% built out. That means future growth will be much more limited and driven primarily through redevelopment and infill than those large subdivisions. Second, multifamily will continue to be the primary source of new residential growth, particularly near employment centers, retail corridors, and entertainment areas, with single-family activity remaining limited to stuff more like townhomes, condos, things like that, build-to-rent projects. And finally, development patterns will continue to be shaped by land constraints, floodplains, and existing industrial uses. But at the same time, emerging opportunities like SB 840 could gradually expand redevelopment potential and create new long-term housing opportunities within the district. And then with that, I'm going to hand it back to Chris to talk about your student numbers.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. So this last section here, of course, will concentrate on student projections, because that's really, at the end of the day, why we are all here. So the student projection factors, all of this stuff, all of these words and all of those 400 pages goes into the student projections, into the creation of the student projections model. I've been doing this work since the late 90s, and it used to be kids plus homes times ratios in these areas that we're building new homes. And now we have, 8 factors here that are on the page. It's become so much more complex here in the last handful of years. We'll start at the top here. Of course, we can't leave out the new housing construction. It's going to yield 100 to 250 students a year for you guys. But as we talked a little while ago, graduating your 12th graders and bringing in your kindergartners can more than take care of that. Your birth rate, we showed a little earlier. We would expect it to continue to decline, certainly for the few years that we've got data for, and likely after that, given just a lot of things that are occurring in the state. Kindergarten class size, that's not always the same as the birth rate, of course, and so they have diverged. And how much more might that kindergarten class size drop below your birth rate? If you look real carefully at the birth rate in the kindergarten classes, there in the last couple of years, it's perhaps that they are diverging just a tiny bit more. And so that's one thing that we have to take into consideration. The aging of the student population, like I mentioned, those 12th graders and those kindergartners, but then we also have to see how first graders become second graders. There's always a change there as they matriculate on through. In and out migration, you got a lot of kids coming in and a lot of kids going out, just sharing students back and forth to other ISDs. Those are programmatic changes. If somebody goes and makes a big change in an adjacent district that is attractive all of a sudden to people, to residents in Arlington ISD, or vice versa, then this will impact the projections here. And so that's just something that we can't know what all of the school districts are planning to do all around you guys in the next decade. Regeneration of established neighborhoods, we are constantly checking for that, but given the 6% interest rates and everybody had a 3% mortgage a little while back, I can't think of a client that I worked for in ages where those established neighborhoods, the ones that we call built out, no more building, have gained kids. And so when I mentioned we had 3 data sets, and so between the first one and the second one, you guys had lost in those neighborhoods 1,284 kids. Between the second one and the third one, meaning to get to this year, that loss was 1,451. And so there is no turning over of those established neighborhoods. And even when they do turn over, the ratios never kind of get back to where they were when they were new. The alternative educational opportunities, I've mentioned that quite a bit. You do have 250 fewer students out to charter schools this year than you did last year. And we think that that is probably just in general the lower birth rates, fewer kids are around in the area, dampening the enrollments there. But as a result, we are not assuming a giant increase continuing on in those charter schools. But of course, we also do have the TIFA funds and the vouchers to deal with here. And then economic drivers, of course, changes in interest rates. Those can really impact everything that we're talking about if something changes dramatically. So we do develop a primary scenario of growth and then a low and a high. And so what you've got is that primary enrollment forecast there that is in the dashed line, and then we've got the accelerated and the reduced there. What you'll notice is that the reduced, that delta between the primary and the reduced is larger than that delta between the primary and the accelerated. And so what that means is that we see the possibility for additional downside more than we see the possibility for upside there. We do go ahead and project for 10 years, but of course, especially with all of the things that are going on right now, we're going to be concentrating on the first couple of years, but we know that if you're making a lot of big changes, then you need, a lot of times you need 6 or 8 or 10 years worth of data there. In order for that accelerated thing to occur, we would have to have things like a lower interest rates. The kindergarten and the birth rates would have to sort of flatten out. The additional House bill or Senate bill that Caroline talked about might yield some additional development in places that it might have taken a little longer to come on. So those are the sorts of things that would play into that. Versus on the bottom, we would continue to see flatter and flatter birth rates. We would continue to see in another 18 months' time more TIFA funds, more money from the state to vouchers in some way. And so you can see how those differences might occur. So we've mentioned the planning units that we use, and so the way that we gather the data and project the data, we have for each one of those planning units, we have the projected students by grade group for each year of the 10 years of the projection period. So we can take all of those planning units, we put them together into your attendance zones, and we can break them apart and do different things with the facilities if we need to. And so this is just a look at how many We are showing in each one of the planning units, just in 2025, you can see some density like in the Sam Houston area, for example. But then we can also look at some projected change over time, with blue being lost and red being gained. Carolyn mentioned it, and you can see, if you'll stop and think back to the heat map that she had about some of the townhomes and things, the River Central in the north, and there's a couple of them in one of your elementary attendance zones, so those are showing up there in red. Now, one thing that it's important for everybody to understand and remember as you're thumbing through the chapter 4 there in the report is there's a difference between resident students and enrolled students. And we start with a projecting of where the students reside. That doesn't always mean that's where they go to school. And so that's where we've geocoded the kids, and we start by analyzing them that way, because if you are going to make changes, you need to understand proximity, how many kids live in the zone, even if you have a big program that's changing that in some way. So most of the maps that you will see are resident students, where do they live? Whereas most of the tables, we have gone ahead and tried to look at transfers and how those programs and other things are impacting them, so that that's a closer estimation for enrollment over time. So this map here shows the projected resident students by elementary attendance zone, and it shows just 2 years worth of data. And I know you could spend hours poring over this stuff. We talk about it forever. But the idea here is that they are color-coded on who's going to grow and who's going to decline. And so based on some of the housing that we talked about there sort of in the north, and then also about the class sizes that you've got right now, like Ellis, for example, it has 89 kids residing in its zone in kindergarten, but a lot of the other class sizes are in the 50s. And so as you matriculate those kiddos on out, if you replace them with 70s, 80s, 90s, then you get an automatic gain there just based on the homes that you've got. So there's two parts that go into this. How many new kids might you put in, but based on new homes, but then also sort of what's going on right now with those 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds as they work through. So some of both of those factors are impacting Ellis and Larson and is it Sherrod or Sherrod? I haven't heard anybody. Sherrod in the northern portion of the district there. And when we're talking about utilization levels here, this is your geocoded or resident students compared to your capacity, so it does not account for all of the transfers. But in general, when we're talking about sizes of schools and where the kids live, you can see that all of the blue is the lower utilization levels, and by and large, it's the eastern side of the district that is seeing the lower levels of utilization, with a little bit more density there toward the western side of the district. And so then these tables here show, and I know it's hard to read, and again, brevity and time and detail and all of that all comes into play. But what we have done is we've taken those geocoded students, we have applied, we have looked at your current transfers and included those, and then we have color-coded them based on the level of utilization. So the transfers that we have used are largely the transfers that are occurring today. But I know with the closure of Blanton, you had kids that would have gone to Swift, but instead now are going to Crow, so we've moved those 60 kids. And then we also did we did adjust a couple of your programs at the that are your more magnetized programs, and so we've grown those a little bit and pulled the students out of the zones that are the largest feeders for that area. But for the bulk of the numbers, we are relying on the transfers that you have occurring presently today. Any child that lives in a zone but attends a school elsewhere, it can be a teacher's child, it can be for any reason at all, or it can be for programmatic reasons. And so when we're looking at the schools that are over, it's only a couple. It's Kukan, of course, but I think that is accounted for based on your morning and your afternoon program there. So when we look at the capacity, it looks bright red, oh my gosh, but I don't think that's what's actually going on. Ditto, Goodman, and South Davis have a little bit of pressure, but it's not very much. And of course, then there's plenty of other ways to deal with that. So you can see an awful lot of blue there, and these are just alphabetized, all three of these next slides for all of your schools there. The Navy is the lowest at less than 60%, and in the fall of 2030, we have 16 of those schools that we're projecting to be, once we account for transfers, we know the transfers change, but in 2030, we're looking at about 16 of the schools that we would expect to be there, and toward the end of the projection period, more like 19 of the elementary schools that would be below 60% of utilization. And then also another thing that's important is as you're looking through all of these, If you're trying to total up the things on the bottom, for example, you've got kiddos that are leaving here to go to Gunn, and so there are transfers that occur across the elementaries, the junior highs, and the high schools if you're looking at all of those numbers. But largely the elementary student projections are, we're projecting the student population to decline by about 3,000 students over the 10 years. So the stories are very, very similar for the junior high schools and the high schools. We are seeing some expected growth. It's less than 200 students in Nichols. That happens to capture all of that area that I touched on just a little bit earlier. At the elementary level, it feeds, of course, into Nichols. But we can see decline, mainly in the southern areas there, Young and Bowles and Owsley and Workman. When we look at utilization, everything is blue to some extent. And then, of course, the highest one that we're actually seeing is Rodriguez, about 87%, but then going ahead and dropping off toward 84%. Your numbers of students transferring in or transferring around is a lot lower. The 27% at Gunn, that does not include the sixth graders that are transferring into Gunn, because this is geocoded students, so don't be panicked by that sort of a thing. So again, here we are looking at the lower levels of utilization there, everybody being basically, once we look at those transfers and include those transfers, where everybody is sitting basically at 80% and below, and with a general trend downward over time. And then at the high school level, it's again very similar. We are showing decline across all of the high schools, and the decline is much larger because if we're looking at where the kids are today, when we're looking at the comparison between 2035 and those giant high school classes that you have now, that is playing into that decline there, of course. And so at utilization levels, there's some space for all of them, of course. We've got everybody sitting here based on the resident students at about 80%. And then when we get later on, or when we get on to discussing what the actual enrollment may look like when we're looking at transfers, we did adjust a few of your Arlington College and Career, those sorts of things. Those have maintained. We looked back in time, and they've been very, very popular programs, but we have dropped those numbers just a touch, just because of the general decline in those large cohort sizes as they're working through. So we've adjusted those just a little bit. So to wrap up here, there are a lot of things to consider. I think you probably know a lot of these things inherently, but it's good to have sort of a conversation about it sometimes. The aging of the student population is a big deal for you guys. The difference between your kindergartens and your 10th and 11th is a big thing that will impact you guys over the next couple of 3 years. Students from new housing, it's still occurring. We have accounted for it, but it's really small numbers compared to everything else. The birth rates, of course, as they continue to decline, it's not just an Arlington ISD thing. It is occurring really throughout the country and a lot of the developed world. Kindergarten enrollment, we will have to continue to watch and see how that follows. It has trended quite closely. And if it stays, then we think we can understand where that may continue to go with those birth rates. And then those alternative educational opportunities, the impacts of those and how those are going to change over time. So with that, I've said an awful lot of words tonight. So it's your turn.
So trustees, I think we will have a couple of challenges with microphones, if I'm not mistaken, in understanding, oh no, we got extra microphones. We're going to be good. We wanted to make sure you open up and just go ahead and ask your questions along the way. Thank you both for giving us this detailed report. And I can tell by some of the notes and the looks, we've got a lot of questions that are coming your way. So we're excited. Thank you. You can use your microphone.
Okay.
Yeah, that's for Justin. There you go.
I think they're all on, so I think we can just speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got a few questions. I'll ask a couple and then let my colleagues go. But the ones that you were just on, slide 47, 48. Mm-hmm. So if you go to 47, you've got, say, Sam Houston at 79% in 35-36 and Bowie at 57. But if I go to slide 48, I see 50% for Bowie and Sam Houston at 53%.
That's because we've included those transfers for the tables as they're coming in. So That's how many students are leaving one school and attending another. There's a net
So
table that shows a net.
the slide 47 has the transfers?
47 is residents. All the maps are mainly residents.
And then
the tables
the tables
generally
including.
include the transfers.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and that's what's leaving those two schools and going into
Right.
the Arlington Collegiate.
Right.
Or Arlington.
Right.
Okay, got it. Okay.
We've got a big tables in the back. It's messy and looks like this, that is ins and outs for all of where they're leaving, where they live, and where they're leaving to go to school.
So going back to the beginning, let me see what slide that is. Long presentation.
There are a lot of slides in this one.
So slide 8, let's start at
Okay.
slide 8. So in the House Public Ed Committee hearing last week, our commissioner was dumbfounded at the precipitous drop in the state enrollment and had no explanation for it. But I think your report does an admirable job of pointing out exactly why we're seeing that decline greater than expected and expected even greater next year. We lost 2,200. The state lost, as you pointed out, 76,000. And then I think if you go to slide 10, and you break it out by ethnicity, both, I love this slide because it's both the state
Right,
and
right.
and Arlington ISD. We lost more Hispanic students this last year than we did during COVID, and that's the only demographic group that is true. And I think there's one obvious reason for that.
Well, for COVID, what we're showing actually is about 1,100 is the drop, and then 700 this year, that big red.
No, I was talking about at the state level.
Oh, okay.
At the
Yep,
state
yep,
level.
Yep. And at the state level, the state had been gaining Hispanic student population at a good clip. So
great clip.
not only did we lose, we didn't gain. And
Right.
so it's more than just a loss.
Yeah, so obviously our immigration policies
Right.
that we've seen this year have had a tremendous impact, not only across the state, even greater amount across the state, but here in Arlington ISD. What in doing the projection going forward, did that factor into your projections going forward?
It did, and I don't know of a soul that would have expected this to happen this year. We heard no discussion about it, and a lot of the projections, of course, that we were doing in the fall for this current year were even prior to the election or prior to any of that. So how that impacts us in doing the projections is not a specific, we are going to continue to pull out another 312 kids for that same purpose. It impacts us based on an attrition retention number and how we account, how we sum the attrition retention that occurred this year versus how it happened the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And so that's, lots of words and data nerd talk about second graders going to third grade, but your second graders went to third grade in a really different way this year. And so we are allowing that to occur some, but we normally would heavily weight those attrition and retention levels for the current year, more so than the last couple of years, because it's more current to what is going on. But we flipped it, more or less. And so we have allowed some of that to continue to occur, but it's not a ton. And so for really next year and maybe a little the next year, we have assumed a little bit more of that may occur, but certainly not another, 700 students.
And it's factors like that that make your job really hard.
Difficult. Yes, we work on between COVID and Hurricane Harvey and in the Houston area and it's been a real adventure.
Yeah, and you pointed out that ESAs, it's way too early to tell. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of private schools, as you pointed out. I thought it was flipped, that we had more charters than private.
You do, you have 3,100 in private school, I think, and 7,700 in charters, maybe.
Oh, in terms of number of entities. Mm-hmm. And are you guys assuming, I think I read that in your report, that because the amount of private schools here in the area, and the ESAs are $10,000 and don't cover the
Don't cover it
tuition.
all.
And it's been very limited. I think you said, what, 2,700 families in our attendance zone applied?
They did, and we have now, I mean, like hot off the presses, how many were in public school who have been awarded?
You were one
It was
step ahead of me.
459 was the number that we came up with that had prior public school enrollment that had been awarded a Tier 1 or Tier 2.
So most of them were in private school.
Yes, yes.
So
So
this is what we're seeing across the
1,067, the numbers that we have gotten from the state are, I mean, like in the last week, are 1,067 Tier 1 and Tier 2 from Arlington ISD that were awarded out of the 2723 that applied, and that 459 had prior public school enrollment.
Great data. I've got a ton more questions, but I'm going to share the mic
Okay.
and let my colleagues have a turn.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, everybody can go ahead and speak freely if you need to. So if you would, can you talk to us a little bit about the I keep forgetting the name of it now, AEOs. The majority of the private school ones that you found, I believe, are at the elementary ages. Isn't that correct? That not all of them are K-12 systems. We found a lot that are pre-K, kinder only in the private school format.
And I don't have that broken, I don't know that off the top of my head as a breakdown. That's normally the case, you know, especially there will be a daycare that will also go ahead and have a kindergarten, or it will be at a church school that will also go ahead and have a kindergarten. The numbers of them that are K-12 are smaller, but then you also pick up with schools that are only high schools.
Yeah.
You know.
I think the one thing for us to keep our eye on, out of those entities that qualified for the voucher subsidy program from the state, the thing that really stood out, the majority of them in our area are at the pre-K and kinder level. And so I think it's going to be super important for us to really monitor enrollment at the pre-K and kinder level these next couple of years to see how this looks playing out in our system. Just because those number of private schools that they noted are typically at that level for us.
speaking on that, you had a slide that showed the color coded by grade level cohort. That was one of my favorite slides, and I can't find
I
it.
can't find it either. Where is it? Demographic trends. No? Keep going the other way. There it is, right there.
All right, here we go. The one thing I thought was interesting is, Justin will know the answer to this. When did we switch to universal pre-K? 2022. Yeah, and when you look at this, our numbers are for 2025 for pre-K 4 are lower than the COVID year. And so is that because those are the ones that are most seeking out those alternatives to public school? They're here, or is just the population
And
decline?
or the population is just declining.
Birth
And
rate.
so there were
The birth rate.
some real oddities in looking at your data there, especially by the time we broke it out, pre-K 3 and pre-K 4. So for our purposes, we had to concentrate on just the last couple of years to try to get trends that way, as opposed to going back as far as, 2020 or 2021, because the numbers were bigger and
Yeah.
and really did drop off like that.
Yeah, I was shocked to see just how big a difference that was, and figured it was the declining birth rates
Right.
and also
Yep.
our increased competition for that age group of
Right.
kiddos, having a tremendous impact where we wanted to. That was a focus area of ours in terms of getting kids in early and getting them prepped.
We have heard some anecdotal evidence or anecdotal stories of charter schools partnering with some daycares and going
Yeah.
in and doing that sort of pre-K sort of thing, very much along the same lines as we're talking.
One thing to note on that as well is that typically right now, I believe, is where we're having the hardest time understanding homeschooling numbers, is these early elementary ages and stuff. Because some kids have just disappeared or never enrolled in our system, and we're assuming that they're actually still here, potentially doing homeschool co-ops, maybe doing the virtual academies that could be across the nation, things like that. So I think that's the other piece of the puzzle here, is how many families are actually choosing to have a homeschooling option at the pre-K, kinder, first grade level.
And that's certainly going on in my neighborhood. I know 3 families that are doing that currently.
And we have seen some evidence of that sort of thing about the homeschool being a much bigger deal, homeschool plus the other AEOs, at the earliest of the grades, because we have, your chart is so, you can't help but understand that maroon stripe as it's moving through. But for other districts that don't have quite such a density they're moving through, we have seen for the last couple of 3 or 4 years kind of some muddiness in the secondary grades. Some years, in 22, it may be the largest cohort is in 6th grade, and in 24, it may be that it's in 9th grade. And so we are suspecting, but always, the smallest ones are the kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade. And so we are suspecting that there's quite a bit more of the homeschooling stuff, because it's a whole lot easier to teach basic, math in the kitchen table and reading than it is to start with physics or algebra. And that, you may see those kiddos coming back in the secondary levels.
Well, why I brought that up, could you go to that slide that you show our projection when it was 43, but you show the band underneath, and you said it's a wider band underneath? One of the things that they've talked about is the opportunities and options, and how this projection could fluctuate based on what other districts around us do, what other things in the state happen, but also what we in Arlington ISD do as well. I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to actually think very differently about options in Arlington ISD as we're moving forward, and this report is a foundation for us to do that. We have to think about how we compete in the virtual market now. We have to think about how we compete in the homeschooling market now. We have to think about how we're competing with the charter schools, et cetera. So the models of education that we've had, you show up, you go to kinder, you exit in 6th grade, you go to the same school for all those years. The families have far different options now that they're seeking in other ways. And I think it's going to be really important for us to start shifting our models to think about how can we be service providers for those families that are choosing other options. If a family is considering homeschool for the first 3 years of life, wouldn't we want to be some kind of service provider for them so they might come back? Meaning we create a micro school so they have some STEM interactions in our schools, so that we have some connection with them at least, and not just no connection at all with them. So this graph right here is the one that is heavily on my mind, because right now at that 51,139 enrollment point, we have some major decisions to make in the next year about what schooling in Arlington ISD needs to look like for the future, because some of the decisions we make right now could either put us on that upward trajectory or on that lower trajectory, because other districts around us are having the same discussion.
I concur, Dr. Smith, and we're at an inflection point, and we can either do nothing, play defense, play offense, or do both. And I think we need a comprehensive plan to do both, play offense and defense, given the data that we see. And I like, your suggestions are spot on. I keep saying I'm an old product manager, and we got to build a better product that the market's demanding. And we've got to be even more attuned to that than we have been in the past. I do have one more question, and I'll turn it back over to my colleagues. Speaking of the House Public Ed Committee, and you mentioned the 76,000, 260-something students that the state lost. Bob Templeton with Strive said they were projecting that's going to be 124,000 or around 125,000 next year. So that's a even bigger precipitous drop at the state level. But I and I know we're one entity in a much bigger picture that make up that number. But I was a little surprised to see that, and I don't think you have it in one of your slides, but in your report, you break out the enrollment projection by year. And you only have us dropping, I mean, you go 51,139, which we are today, to next year, 49,564. So a drop of, and it's just a small percentage drop, not the
Not a
big
one.
drop that others are projecting for the state. Is there a reason why you think we're not going to see as big a drop?
Well, for one thing, you all dropped in charter school kids this year, right, by 250? The state as a whole gained in charter school students by 70, what number did I say, 7,700, 7,800, that took more students away from the traditional ISDs. So I think that's part of it, is that we're not projecting a continued massive charter loss.
Right.
And then I can't speak to what their projections are and what they're based on, what sorts of assumptions that they were using. We have expected the impact of the immigration to have been largest this year. And if they are continuing that on in a heavier rate, then that could be the differential. And at this point, unfortunately, I'm not sure how we're going to know until they walk in the door.
Yep. That's what makes your job really hard right
with
now.
this, right?
So,
Yeah, we started getting our first data back in the fall, and I went, what is going on? Because nothing was making sense,
yeah. All right.
Are there other questions, comments?
Well, I wanted, Dr. Smith, you talked about a minute ago that we have to meet parents where they are and looking at some of this. I know that this last week you sent out an email talking about online learning for upper pathways and different avenues. Can you explain that a little bit more, that thought process based on what we're seeing here?
Yeah, and I'll go from theory first to practicality. One of the things that we've been working on as a leadership team is becoming more ambidextrous organization. Instead of just planning to maintain what we currently do, how do we create an organization that does what we do well, but also innovates to create new space for products that people are actually wanting in the marketplace right now. We have to think of ourselves more of a business model now, and being able to say there's increased competition in the state of Texas regarding public schooling and private schooling. What is the model that we need to look at? One of the first things that came up last year because of the previous legislative session was the expansion of virtual school opportunities. And so we pushed really hard this year to just try and get the ball rolling, to provide some options and get input from our parents at this point about what the interest is in the virtual school options. Ultimately, for me, if we have 51,000 students in Arlington ISD, and let's say 200 of them are interested in some form of virtual, I would rather provide that virtual than have a virtual school in Georgia provide that virtual option. So we're trying to get a sense of how many people are actually interested in that in our school district, and to what product can we put together that still maintains a high level of quality for our students that we're serving in Arlington ISD, but also meets them in the delivery mode or method that they're asking for as families. And that's the reason we put that out right now, is we have some options for our families to consider for this next year, but we're wanting to try and engage and have them say, hey, I'm kind of interested in that, and then get that information from them so we can help build product that actually meets the demand of the people in our district.
When you talk about online learning, I think a lot of us as parents, we go back to COVID days. And what it reminds us of is the hybrid learning where a teacher's teaching a class in front of them, then they have kids on the iPad, and they're trying to do both. Is that the type of learning that you're talking about now?
I think there are various modes, and Kyle can probably help me out if he wants to come talk a little bit more about this. I think there are various modes of that we actually have the option to talk about. I think sometimes that is absolutely it. I think other times it is a self-paced curriculum where they're working through your curricular options as a school district and maybe coming in just for science labs or PE activities. And we've given them the curricular pieces through an online platform that they can complete. In others, I think that there's very direct instruction that happens just for a cohort of students, but it doesn't, it's more like a college model. It doesn't necessarily look like what you all remember from those COVID times. Kyle, is there anything else to add there?
No, absolutely. Definitely a mix of opportunities there that we can have just the, self-paced, online with a teacher interaction, just the whole hybrid mix can really fit in is what we're kind of be looking at. So there's several different directions we can go to fit the different needs.
Is there a reason that we started at the upper grades and the upperclassmen grades with this process?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's a really, Stephen, in the curriculum side, really we're evaluating where our best impact would be to get started, where some of the areas of content creation and stuff might be. So looking with some of our partners to kind of find where that best fit might happen.
One of the things we've heard a lot in the high school, having a high schooler myself, is that they are having to go to online Texas Tech University and different places to
Absolutely.
take this one course they need, and they can knock it out online in 3 weeks, but they're also paying $300 to $500 to
Absolutely.
take that course that they could take with Arlington, and providing that online lets us meet that need for parents, but also it is economically feasible as well, and that's a service that
Yes.
we can do to our community.
Absolutely.
When do you, I know there's a survey that was sent out. When will that survey close for parents?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I apologize.
Tanya might know, she's coming up.
The survey right now is slated to close May 30th.
Perfect. Okay, because I know parents often say, I wish there was a survey. Well, there is one. But if we can get word out that it is out there, please take it when the date is due, that will provide more community feedback.
Absolutely. That way it kind of gives us an idea which direction we can start going, what that pulse is. Several districts started trying to build up and then several started backing out. And so it's kind of this weird flux right now because I think a lot of people underestimated the difficulty of starting up a program. So everybody's going to have some sort of flavor, and that's why when we get a consensus or some sort of survey results, we can figure out which is our best path. But I agree on what you're saying. The courses, usually like health and all those other ones that we do in the summertime for acceleration, are really low-hanging fruit. That's easy for us to bring in and do ourselves.
Absolutely. Also, does that bring funds in for us, for students that maybe need to take some of those courses
It
through
absolutely
us?
can. For acceleration, you can't do it you can't charge for like non-acceleration. Does that make sense?
Okay. On page 21, when we looked at the pie graph there,
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
seeing that we have those virtual academies that are 1.2%, that is not going to get us back the numbers that we need to keep growing.
Right. I'm hearing a lot of my clients say, we're starting a virtual program, hoping to bring students in, but their neighbor is starting a virtual program, and their neighbor's neighbor is starting a virtual program. So I fear it's going to be a whole lot of trading kids back and forth.
Okay, thank you.
I do see value in the virtual school for our own students, though, in that, using the high school example, we might be dropping German at a particular high school, and it's still offered in another high school that now gives those students opportunity, or if we can't make BC calculus, and we have someone at SAM that really needs to take BC calculus for their dream of going to medical school, then that's a way we can have continuity of opportunities for our students that might be challenging given the enrollment drops that we're seeing.
I wonder if it's an opportunity too for teachers who during COVID enjoyed teaching virtually or enjoyed that type of classroom experience doing it online versus others who have said, I never want to do virtual ever again, but meeting needs of teachers who would like to teach a different style and maybe found out that's where their talent really lied, was in that type of virtual classroom.
One of the things that I think we're also interested in exploring right now, and this is exploration phase with these things, is the ability to retain students too. So if you have a family that in second grade says, I want to actually homeschool my child right now, what is happening around the state is they will go to a homeschool convention and buy curriculum in homeschool, and they'll be able to do that and in their home. And then at some point, often what you see with the homeschooling families is a reemergence into public school, charter school, or private school, because we have the options that they don't have in their home, like fine arts options, athletic
STEM.
options, and CTE options. And so the other part that we're really trying to take a look at is that population that we know is growing, but we can't track them very well, the homeschooling population. Is there a way for us to stay connected so they stay, quote, Arlington ISD, and when they come back, they're going to definitely come back to our school district versus some of the other options that they may have. So that's another reason we're talking a little bit about exploring at those lower levels, lower grade levels too, because some of this is a retention issue. You see this chart in front of us right here, and over a number of years, like this didn't happen overnight. This has been going on for a number of years. And we have to ask ourselves the question, what would it take to retain people or their connection to Arlington ISD, and would that benefit us for enrollment for the future? I did say something to you in the fall when we all met, and I have to reiterate it again just because I can't help myself. We can't market ourselves out of this. We have declining birth rates. We have a different educational landscape. And it's not just marketing that we have to think about. We have to approach this totally differently for the future.
Thank you for reiterating that, Dr. Smith. And that gets into kind of my next line of questioning. Ms. Poole, if you could turn to slide 40, these charts were pretty sobering. We've got a lot of facility planning to do. I don't think there's anyone in this room that would argue that a school that's at less than around 50% capacity is the kind of student experience we want for our students. And we've got a lot of tough choices to make, and I think, so what's next in terms of planning, facility planning for this reality?
So this is a major piece of the puzzle. That's why we wanted to have this as a separate workshop for you all and to be able to dive in. Obviously, they've done a deep dive, and we need our board to know this material inside and out. The next major item for our board to consider is a decision on what you want to do with sixth grade moving forward. Why? You can see by this chart right here, we have under-enrolled or underutilized, elementary schools right now. And if you end up moving sixth grade up to junior high, that number is going to go even lower. And we have to have that decision as we plan for the future on how we utilize these facilities. And you can see similar numbers in some of our junior highs as well. What I would expect now is, since you have this report and you know that you're going to have a discussion on sixth grade moving forward, after that decision is made, we will need to kick off a facility planning committee that is actually looking at all of this data and where Arlington ISD wants to go moving forward. At the same time, our leadership team and others have to be exploring innovation in our system like we've never explored it before, to talk about program offerings. And by January of next year, we should have, or we need to have, some planning in front of you all to consider what a reimagining Arlington ISD's use of facilities needs to look like through program options and also through potential combination of schools, consolidation of schools, closing of schools, et cetera. That's a discussion that has to happen in the next eight months so that we can get things underway, because it doesn't all happen overnight from that point. It's going to be a multi-year process based on the data that PASA's laid out here in front of us.
Ms. Poole, I'm curious, that is a big decision that we have in front of us. Of all the districts that you've worked with that have been in the same situation as us, maybe they had sixth grade middle school, and to consolidate, they're considered moving it down, or they're in our situation where we're considering moving it up. What have you seen, and do you have any insight on the decisions other districts have made regarding that?
Almost all of our clients operate with either an EE5 or a K5 and a 6-8 model. So I haven't seen that, I haven't seen a situation where we are seeing decline and we're moving the sixth grade up at the same time. Most of the time when I'm dealing with moving the sixth grade to join with the seventh grade, it's because of a facility's reason from growth. And so they have needed to, they can build one middle school, and it takes it relieves elementaries, and it relieves the middle school also by taking 7th and 8th graders and pulling your sixth grade out of your elementary school. So,
That makes sense.
you know, that is the majority of what I see. And by the time you get to this sort of stabilization, decline sorts of phase, that's normally the grade group that's already in place. But it is always a bit of a question mark. You know, we do have some clients that do a 5-6 and a 7-8.
Yeah,
We have very few that do a K6.
yeah, we are unique, although not completely unique. There are a lot of school districts, or at least districts, that have a split of sixth grade in elementary versus middle school or junior high. I would just want to look at the numbers and see what's most efficient in terms of consolidating, because it seems to me it's a lot easier to consolidate a couple of junior highs than it is elementary schools. So.
But have you, sorry, I'm just going to jump in. So have you been, the environment where we're seeing widespread decline in enrollment is relatively new, right?
It is relatively new. Like I say, I've worked for Frisco ISD since 1999, and so those red map, those decline Region 11 maps that I showed, well, you weren't here, the very, very beginning, shows that the central portions of the district, the urban areas, are declining. They're in blue. Fort Worth and Dallas, and you guys. Dallas had 1 year here recently where they gained a little bit. In the last 20 years, those maps have changed markedly. It used to be, when I began working for Frisco ISD, that there was still growth going on in those areas. And then a little blue started to occur in the more central portions of the state, central, city portions, and it has grown outward for sure.
Yeah, but it's pretty much a pattern that we've seen nationwide, though, where you have larger urban areas and suburban areas that
Right.
developed fast in the
Yes.
60s, 70s, and 80s. You're seeing that all across the country, and we're not, we're very much within that pattern, right?
You are within that pattern, certainly for the state. We really concentrate on the state, but we do work heavily in the Houston area. We work heavily in the Austin, San Antonio sort of a corridor. And yes, that is what we're seeing everywhere.
Do you think it's possible, to the point Mr. Wilbanks just made, that perhaps we haven't seen districts using grade reconfigurations as a declining mitigation strategy because it's relatively new?
The grade configuration, I'm not sure if I don't know if I think that one way or the other is going to stop.
Not necessarily to stop it, but to address underutilization of the existing facilities.
I do think, I don't know, this is, a little bit out of my realm. Yes, it is a situation where we have this bit of decline, and certainly a statewide sort of a decline is very, very new. That part is very new. And the decline in the central cities is newer. And I think people are trying to figure out how to handle it. And they have, the first time I heard the word marketing from a school district was maybe 10 years ago in the Houston area. Yeah. And I thought, oh, marketing, for a school district. And it was the first time, and now I hear it 4 times every single board meeting.
Right.
Because it's something that's got to go on.
Well, because it just, what jogged my thought there was something that you said about you've seen districts maybe move a 6th grade up or do something different in a growth scenario, but there's a long history here where we used to have, so our junior highs used to be 7, 8, 9, and then in 1997 we moved 9th grade up to high school, and so they've been 7, 8 for a long time. But the idea of moving 6th grade up actually did come up in a phase when we were still somewhat in a growth scenario about, I can't remember if it was 12, 13, 14 years ago. The district did look at it, and at the time we had significantly more students, and so we were not going to be able to make that move without expanding a significant number. The junior highs was kind of shelved. And so my thought is if we've seen that in the growth scenario, that moving a grade might be used as a strategy to address, in that instance, overutilization. Is it just too soon to say that moving grades can be used as a strategy to mitigate underutilization going forward?
It's possible, but in this situation, we're showing underutilization at all 3 levels.
Right. Right. I did have a very related question. So we have somewhat recently, about a month ago, had a report from our other demographer, Zonda, your competitor, I assume, and they had on their charts a distinction between design capacity and functional capacity, and and we also looked at utilization numbers, but when you're using capacity and utilization here, is that based on design capacity or functional?
That is the functional capacity, if I am remembering, because we were given a couple of different numbers, and I believe that these are the functional capacities that came from the facility study,
Okay.
as opposed to ones that had been being used in the past.
So it's not just absolute capacity.
Right.
Right.
Functional.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. That's what I have for right now.
What do you see as far as leaving pre-K through 6, then do a 7, 8, 9, and then 10, 11, 12? Does that shift anything? Are you seeing anything with that?
Well, the underutilization, like I said, is occurring at all 3 grade levels. And so from my sort of a standpoint, I would look more at which of these facilities are you wanting to and needing to keep. I know the 7, 8, 9, I went to a junior high that was 8, 9, you know, and so I understand that, and we used to do quite a bit of study, and I'm talking way back here, something well before Caroline's time. We used to do study of exactly that sort of a thing. And so most of, from my understanding, and this is not my area of expertise, because I'm not an educator, but from my understanding, the grade levels were put in place with the 9, 10, 11, 12, because ninth graders, if they're not part of the 10, 11, 12, you know, those are high school credits that they've got to have to get into college, and do they realize that yet? About how important that is, and is there anything that's anchoring them to stay and be interested in all of that, some of these things that you might get if you were at the high school, as opposed to with an 8th grader or a 7th grader that's in a different spot. Similar sort of thing with the 6th grade, and that was always the question. Where are we going to put the 6th graders? It's rarely the 5th graders, it's rarely the 7th graders, it's the 6th graders, because there's, you know, some of your 6th graders are 3.5 feet tall and some are 6'4". And so those were always educational sorts of things. Do we want those kids to go on and be able to play the football and whatever's in middle school? Probably more so than from a facility standpoint.
Of course, I don't know that 9th graders in high school even realize about the credits.
Right.
They still don't get it, you know? And I know a district that I had worked in many, many years ago, they had a 9th grade center, and it was just 9th graders. And I think that worked well. It gave them time to grow up. They didn't feel the pressures of high school, but they weren't down with the junior high kids either. But that was an interesting model, and I thought it worked well.
I've been told that too, that it was very successful in some situations, especially if it was attached to, nearby, adjacent, across the street from. But if you had to get on a bus to go to track practice, then it was far less successful.
Right. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any feedback, comments?
Just to say this was an
Yeah.
awesome report, and I
Okay,
really
thank you.
appreciated it.
Thank you.
Very in-depth.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you compiling the binders for us, because I know that this is going to be foundational for us, and that
Good,
we
good,
will
good.
go back and refer back to this multiple times throughout the next
take a
year, I'm
map.
certain.
Take a
And do we
map,
have
too.
maps, too?
You
We
have
have big
maps.
maps.
We have 10 or 12 of them.
I'm going
so
to clear
everybody
off
can
a
get
wall
one.
in my office. at
Do
home.
it, absolutely. That's why they're here.
That's incredible. Thank you guys for being here. We
Okay,
appreciate it.
absolutely.
If there are no other questions, we are going to go ahead and recess at 7:05 PM and return for the second portion of our workshop in room 401 as we discuss the compensation plan development. So the time is 7:18 PM, and we are now back from recess. Our last topic for the workshop tonight is compensation plan development report.
So I want to introduce, y'all know Holly, and Holly has a guest here tonight. We are doing this as a workshop this evening because it's a really critical time. We need your input as a board. As you know, we're getting to budget development finalization here in the next month where you have to adopt the budget, but one of the key things is the compensation plan and the development of that budget. So with Holly, with Scott, with our guest Keith from TASB here tonight, with Roberto, we have some presentation pieces for you, but also some discussion pieces that we're going to be going through to gather your input so that we can give you a thoughtful and pointed recommendation is we come back to you here at the beginning of June with our compensation plan. Holly?
Okay. Good evening, trustees. Dr. Smith, thank you for having us. Keith McLemore. He'll introduce himself in a minute. But as Dr. Smith shared with you, tonight we're here to review compensation, some healthcare considerations for the 26-27 school year that's approaching us to maximize our talent and resources. And I'm going to hand it over to Keith. He's going to do the first portion of the presentation, and then I'll do the second portion. All right, Keith.
Thank you. Superintendent Smith, trustees, glad to be here. I've been here before, but in the larger format, so I'm just going to be here in a smaller setting, so I don't need my glasses. I've been at TASB 10 years. I'm a compensation and HR consultant, and I've had the pleasure of working with your district, I think, 3 years now. And I primarily do compensation reviews and market research and other things. But we're going to just show you the results of the work we did this year. First off, just want to show you the market districts. We try to keep these very similar from year to year, just so we're not, chasing one goal 1 year and then, the bar moves if we add in too many other districts. But as you can see, one district, Fort Worth, did not do. It's our survey where we get the lion's share of the data for these projects, and but we did bring in their teacher hiring schedule so we can have that to compare with the other districts for teacher comparisons. And we do bring in private sector data, especially in this area and other urban districts like in the Houston area, San Antonio, etc. People can be a custodian here, or they can go do the same in the private sector, like diesel mechanic, an accountant, speech language pathologist, etc. So we bring in, sometimes we average data with these private sector data sources, comp analysts, and pay factors by pay scale, or if we don't have it in our survey, a locksmith is not one that comes to mind. We don't survey for that, but we want to get that data, so we'll use these. And that comes from the local Fort Worth metro area. We'll start off talking about teachers just briefly with the history, the experience data that you can see here. It's snapshot in time data, so this does change a little from year to year. But the main takeaways for me is that the blue pie slide shows where 12% of your total teacher population had 0 years of prior teaching experience. And the other notable thing is, or thing worth pointing out, is the green pie slice, which represents teachers with 6 to 10 years of experience. Not always in urban districts, this is a little bit more common that it's past the 6 o'clock, if you imagine it like a clock, but typically we see that in about the 6 o'clock range. It's a little on the less experienced side, but that's a much more common trend the last few years. Newly hired teachers, there were 411 included in the data set, and you can see again that blue pie slice, about 39% or 159 had 0 years of prior experience, but the rest of the pie chart is a good distribution of experience. So you are doing a good job of hiring at multiple levels of experience. So this graphic here is really helpful. We're looking at the 0, 5, 10, 15, and 20 benchmark years of that peer district list of their hiring schedules versus Arlington ISD's. Orange is where your hiring schedule is at. Blue is the local market median. And after our House Bill 2 and with the teacher retention allotment, because all those peers are over 5,000, you did see a big spike at year 5 because districts that are smaller than 5,000 got $8,000 per teacher with that much experience or more. And in districts with more than 5,000, it was 5,000. But so pretty much you've maintained your very good market position here, which is great across all levels, survey levels of experience. This is the data that drives that graphic, and can't really do pointers anymore like in the old days. But these are the dollar differences for market, which I think are pretty telling versus the market comparisons, because that can be a little nebulous unless you work in the data like I do all the time. You can see anywhere, from year zero, y'all are about $2,800 above market, all the way up to year 20, just under $4,200 above market there. The other data point is average salary comparison. You're about over $3,600 above what the peer group is paying on average. So looking strong across all of those areas. For benchmarks, this isn't looking at all of the stipends, just the ones that are more common for teacher add-ons and to differentiate pay for areas like bilingual, special education, etc. But the Arlington's data points are represented here, the market is here, and the number of districts reported are here. And the district is leading, your district is leading the market in all of these, except for special education high needs. High needs being where, it could be a self-contained environment, diapering might be going on, other high needs type situations. And so that is one area that it is surprising that y'all are still in the $3,500 range for the market, because other places in the state I'm seeing $4,000 or $5,000. I can imagine it would catch up here at some point, but you are behind market $500 there, so that might be a consideration to maybe get that up to market. You're at market or above market for all of the other stipends shown here. Looking at the non-teacher pay groups, this is on the far left, you can see the pay group title, central administration for business side of the district, central administration for instruction or education. Then you have campus administration, which are the principals, assistant principals, professional, doing professionals that are exempt jobs, doing business type things, functions, professionals doing instruction, functions that are exempt jobs, and the technology is down there as well. You can see the employee pay compared to market as a percentage, and if these are all great comparisons. Either approaching market for technology up to 12% above, which is really rare air for your principals and assistant principals. House Bill 2, with that TRA money being injected and the average teacher salary going up 7.5% statewide, many districts are struggling to maintain competitive pay for these teacher career pathway type positions, especially counselors and those principals. So kudos to y'all for being able to maintain your market position there. Technology is notoriously difficult for public sector to keep up with private sector, so actually being just 1% off is really good, in my opinion. And you can see the pay grade midpoints, that how they compare to market, because the raises are calculated off of those midpoints. It's important that these are market competitive, so you can see that the district's pay structures for these job families are in good shape there as well. Benchmarks are the number of jobs that were included for each group that we found a benchmark for. For the non-exempt hourly type jobs, families, we have the educational aides, administrative support, it's like clerical, payroll, purchasing, those sorts of positions. And then administrative assistants and auxiliary, the bus driver, custodial, child nutrition, etc. And employee pay compared to market, you can see aides have a nice lead on the market there, and that's really good considering how many other opportunities there are for those people with those same qualifications to go make money or go earn a living somewhere else. So that's a really good data point. You can see you're 101% of market for the other two families. The pay grade midpoints are also all at above market. And the pay grade minimums, which are really key, not only for teachers, but for these jobs, because that's what if I'm looking for a job, that's what I see is that starting bus driver rate typically, right? And so it's, you are in good shape there for those minimums. And it's rare that I have so many positive, everything's in the positive. So this is good news. This is good news. Considerations that we're putting out are pretty similar from year to year, but number one would be there are three options. We put out there three models to consider. One is a 2% increase model for all job groups. And that's when I say 2%, it's not the budget impact, it's what the like if you get it's a 2% pay increase or a 3% for Model 2 or 4%, that's exclusive of the recommended adjustments. And for teacher and support staff structures, GPI and support staff here being jobs that are teacher adjacent, that are exempt. I'm not talking about like those administrative support or instructional aid type jobs. But the general pay increase for GPI is calculated as a percentage of the market median teacher salary. And this is a market-based pay system, so that's why it's done that way for teacher and teacher-aligned jobs. When it got cut off, I apologize for that bullet drifting down. But the other one says for the non-teacher groups, basically, the general pay increase is calculated as a percentage of each employee's pay grade midpoint, and what the rest of that says. So, other considerations, the providing adjustments to address market differences and maintain equity, and one of those is on the teacher hiring schedule in order to comply with the regulations I guess it's the law, the teacher retention allotment stipulations about making 2,500 a year 3 and 4 teacher has to make at least 2,500 more than they would have or did in this district 2 years ago for 24-25. And for year 5, they have to make at least 5,000 more than they would have or did in 24-25. So there are some additional adjustments to comply with that on your hiring schedule. And we don't just want to get anyone who is below the minimum, the pay grade minimum, up to that minimum. We want to get them slightly above that. That's why this is 1% above minimum. There are some adjustments needed for that. Strategic adjustments basically look at individuals who are low in their pay grade, even after any other increases or adjustments, and because they're really low in their pay grade, that is, they're low to market. So there's a 1% of additional, 1% of midpoint additional adjustment that is calculated for people who meet that criteria. And the cost models, Model 1 is going to be 10.9 million, and it's a 2.1% budget impact. And if you follow these are these adjustments I was speaking to for adjustments to minimum and strategic adjustments across those pay groups. And you can see the general pay increase is a little below, even though we're calling this a 2% model, because the district has competitive pay, and you're calculating them off of those market, the midpoints. The general pay increase is a 1.9% budget impact. I get asked about that, so I just get out in front of it sometimes. If you're a lagging market, that would probably be like 2.2% budget impact. So that's a good thing about staying market competitive. One of the good things. And Model 2 is a 3%, which would be $15.6 million. That is a 3% budget impact. And you might notice that these adjustment costs go down as the general pay increase gets stronger. And Model 3, the 4%, we're looking at, or the district is looking at $20.8 million, or a 4% budget impact. Thank you.
All right, so to continue the presentation, I show this to you every time. This is our UEA Teachers Association salary comparison. Arlington ISD continuously year over year is on, it's on top, which is, thanks to the school board increases over the past few years. We appreciate it, and you can see it's paying off for our employees. And then this is some information that I've gathered to date. I'm still monitoring what's being shared in the DFW, but these are the districts that are in our local market. Those districts that Keith was talking about earlier. And so I wanted just to share the raises that they've announced so far. So we've got Dallas ISD, who's announced a 5% teacher raise with a teacher starting salary of $68,000, and then a 2% midpoint raise for all their other staff. Fort Worth has also announced a 5% raise. They have not highlighted their teacher starting salary outside of their new Elevate campus is what I believe they're calling it. But just looking at what that raise is, I'm estimating it'd be about $67,725. And then the Elevate campus's starting salary, that's that new model that they're doing, is $88,000. Garland ISD has announced a 4% teacher raise which puts their teacher starting salary to $63,000 and a 4% midpoint raise for all of their staff. Louisville ISD varies, and I made notes over here to the side because it's a little complex what they're doing, but they're doing different raises for different years of experience for their teachers, with a starting salary of $64,250 and then a 3% midpoint raise for the remainder. Plano is 2% for both teacher and for their staff, the starting salary of $64,000, and then same for Richardson ISD, except they're doing a 3% raise for their paras and their auxiliary. We do have 8 market districts to date that have not announced raises, but I'm continuing to monitor that. Just so you're aware, as of right now, our teacher starting salary for the 25-26 school year is $66,100. We've been talking about healthcare over the past several months. Some of these things I've shared with you, but just to highlight them again, trustees, you approved a $33 per employee per month increase to our healthcare contribution. When you did that, we did see an increase in our employees enroll, about 300 additional employees enrolled this year. So I do believe that it does have something to do with that increase, so we appreciate that. UEA has us ranked number 19 out of 40. If you were to pull the UEA comparison for healthcare, we actually look lower, but they made a note that they don't include our wellness, so I like to include our wellness as a contribution because we offer it to all of our employees. And so that would rank us number 19 out of 40 in that medical UEA contribution list. I did share with you on the April 9th meeting that we don't quite compare with private sector in our healthcare contribution. And so if we wanted to increase our healthcare contribution to align with that, it would need to be about $125 per employee per month, which is $7.2 million a year. That's a lot of money, but I wanted to make sure I shared that with you. TRS sent out some information recently, and they did an analysis, and they said for every $10 that an employer contributes, they see an additional 1% in participants, which I found very interesting because we did the $33 and we added about 300 employees. So there's also, we shared with you that we were, TRS was considering adding us to a pilot, and I'm excited to say that that's happening. We are the only district in Region 11 that is part of that pilot. We had several districts call us, they're like, how did you get into the pilot? We want to get into the pilot. So they're really excited for us and they want to participate. It's us and Region 4. The whole Region 4 is in the pilot. And so what the pilot is for us is a 2% difference just for the primary. It's not a 2% for these, and so that's why you see an 8% adjustment and 11%, but it's 2%. However, even though we're seeing a 2% reduction in those premiums, we're still seeing an increase of 8%. So our employees are going to see, employee only, are going to see a $46 increase per month. I will share that the TRS Aftercare Primary is our most utilized plan. We see employees that continuously leave HD and go into the primary, but it is our most utilized plan, so we will have some cost savings there. On your table, I did leave you what that looks like. There is a tiered approach that our employees not only can save some money with the difference between the 2%, but the model is basically trying to incentivize our employees to use healthcare providers that are more cost effective, which is a claims reduction strategy that TRS is trying to do to see if it will work. Then they'll look at implementing it around the state if it works. So there's going to be some co-pay plans for our employees to select which healthcare provider they want to go to. So not only will they be paying a little bit less than our other districts in Region 11, but they'll also have the option of paying a little bit less when they visit the doctor. And those options, those tiered options, are not available for the other districts in Region 11. So, and then I listed our healthcare contributions down here. For our paraprofessionals and our auxiliary, we currently contribute $365 with wellness and $350 per month with wellness for our professionals. We've talked about the clinic at the last meeting, and I brought a different clinic to you last time that I'm bringing to you this time, just to kind of highlight we have some options. This is a clinic called Next Level. I do want to preface that they're not here in the DFW today. They did say if that was something that we were interested in, they could realistically be here around January 2027. They would look at purchasing some existing clinics and then opening here. I asked them what would that look like, and they said that they would get a list of all the zip codes to see exactly where our employees are positioned and look for some clinics that are kind of dispersed around. And they would consider about 2 or 3 and then kind of grow from there if need be. But as part of that clinic, there is urgent care, primary care, and preventative care. There's also things like coaching for emotional wellness, and there's also telemedicine and virtual visits, which are really nice because maybe you have the sniffles and you're at work, you can actually set up a telehealth visit right there, get your medication. They also do on-site labs, which is nice because it's not fun to go to your doctor and then like, oh, now you need to go over here and do labs. They'll do them right there, which is time effective, as well as immunizations, the flu shots or COVID-19 vaccines, whatever they need. They also offer weight loss solutions, and they have a really nice, convenient app. One of the things on their app is, I haven't tested it myself, but you can actually put your face up to the app and it'll actually read like your blood pressure, and so it's kind of neat. Another really good thing about this,
That's scary, that's not neat.
I'd like to try it. But,
Is it because your eye's twitching?
I don't know. So I just was like, wow, that's really neat. So, I guess if you're feeling anxious that day, you can put your face up to your camera and kind of see where you're at. But one really cool thing about this is it would be no cost to our employees when they visit the doctor. So they can show up, and they told me it could be every day for the whole month. I don't know why an employee would do that, but they could. Every day they could show up, and they would not have to pay a penny. And as part of that, they also don't have to run our health insurance card. So none of these goes towards any of our claims. And if you remember, we've talked repetitively over the years about our claims data. We were at 122%. We did some claims data reporting recently, and we're now at 115, so we're seeing some improvement. But this could be a strategy to offset some improvement. This was shared with me. This is from another district. This is from a smaller district, but I just kind of wanted to highlight the total employer service value. They went and they utilized $4.5 million at the clinic. The district was paying $1.4 million for their employees to use the clinic, and then because of that, they offset $3 million in claims that instead of going to the plan, into the insurance plan, they were able to offset for this model here for this district. I don't know which district it is, just to be transparent. Their per month pricing is $34.25 for the employee-only cost. And then there's options to add the spouse or dependents or the plus all dependents for that. And then at the table, I left the references. I linked them into the presentation, but they're also at the table if you wish to read them. These are references from some of the other districts that use them around the Houston area and San Antonio area, and they're also expanding to Corpus Christi. And they also work with other organizations outside of school districts, so they're not just school districts only. But this is just another option that we could consider. So our total compensation and benefits considerations, Keith talked about how we're $500 below market for our special ed teachers. I know how important it is to have our special ed teachers in our classrooms, so I wanted to provide an option here. If we wanted to become market competitive and get back to that market value, at $500 would be $170,000 annually. If we wanted to be even more competitive, $1,000 would be $335,000 annually. And that's for our specialized programs like C's, ABLE, ISD. And so that's just some options to consider. We also have the cost estimates Keith talked about earlier, but I wanted to highlight what those starting salaries would be because we like to know what our starting salaries would be. And remember, I just shared with you that right now today we're at $66,100. A 2% increase for our teachers would be $67,000. A 3% increase would be $67,700. And then our 4% increase would be $68,500. And that's for teachers. Now the numbers would be all across the board raises, but the starting salary there is unique for the teachers. And then earlier I shared with you the private sector, where we lag in the private sector is $125, so there's a couple of considerations. We could consider increasing we could advertise it as increasing the healthcare contribution, but putting that towards the clinic, and that would be $34.25 per month, and that would be about $2 million for our medically enrolled employees. We want to incentivize our medically enrolled employees, but we can certainly provide an option for the rest of our employees to also pay the $34.25 and buy up for their spouse and dependents if they choose to do so. And then if we wanted to target the 50% private sector, which is $62.50, if we did half of that, of the $125, we also could consider adding another $28.25. The two combined is $62.50, and that'd be another $1.6 million. So before I hand it off to Norberto, is there any questions that you have for Keith or for myself? And I'll be sticking around for additional questions. I just wanted to, if there's anything you have for Keith.
Do you know the districts that have opted into the clinic model? Do you know how they arrange it between folks who are already on the healthcare plan versus folks who are not? Do they typically only offer it to the ones who are on the plan, or do they offer it to everybody?
It depends. Like, for example, Arlington ISD has an on-site clinic that they manage themselves. They hire their own physician, they do their own thing, and they allow that for all the employees. All of their employees and the employees' dependents can come. I don't know what they pay, but I do know that they use their insurance card as part of that. I know Mesquite ISD, they use that model that I shared last time, and it's on staff. And I do believe that they allow for all employees, but whether they're paying for their medically enrolled, I don't know. But I have talked to some other, the districts that I talked to that are on these references, they're doing the model that I was sharing with you to consider about using it for our medically enrolled, because the goal is to do a claims reduction strategy. And if we're providing the option to all of our employees in paying for all, then we're not incentivizing our employees to jump into our plan. Because we actually have a lot of, in theory, there's a lot of healthy employees who are like, I don't need health care, so I'm not going to get onto our plan. If we can incentivize them by saying, hey, we have this clinic model, they might be willing to come onto the plan, and then that's also kind of a co-partner at reduction strategy at the same time. Great question. All right, so I'm going to hand it off to Norberto, and if you have any more questions, I'll be available as well.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So this next part is the fund balance calculator. In front of you on your devices, you have an Excel spreadsheet. It is locked, so you can only access what is in blue. So I'm going to just kind of do a quick summary of how the data runs. Column A is just kind of a description, and it's laid out in the format of your statement of revenues and expenditures and changes in fund balance. So you will see revenues, and then you see expenditures, and you see the net between both. And then you see a section below it, other financing sources, and then below you have net changes in fund balance. At the very bottom, in a separate little table, this is what I've shared at a previous presentation, and it shows the days of expenditure in terms of fund balance. So that's kind of the way to read the data from the top to the bottom. Column B is last year's actuals. Column C is this year's amended. Column E is an example if nothing changes. If enrollment is the same, if all costs are the same, it is a static comparison. So that shows you at the very bottom what the impact of the deficit would do to fund balance. At the very bottom, under column C, highlighted in yellow, we have about 137 days of fund balance based on amended data. If nothing changes, column E, that result decreases to about 101 days with no changes. Column G now shows the target KPM. These were the reductions to achieve the KPM. This is reflected when we jump over to the last column in column Q. So if you go to column Q, you see total expenditures there. They are lower now. They're at $657 million instead of the $681 million found on column E. That is the impact of the KPM. So because of that, if you go down to the very bottom, highlighted in yellow, you see 118 days, right? So instead of going from 137 days under column C So 101 days, if no changes had been made, we're actually at 118 with changes. Now, the columns in between, columns H, I, K, N, and O, these are the ones that have the blue cells. So these are the columns that can be edited. To the right-hand side of this, you'll see a table which shows the figures that were just presented by Tasby and by Holly. So it shows a 2% consideration, a 3% consideration, and a 4% consideration by employee row. And then it shows stipend change, the benefit change in terms of the increased contribution, and the clinic level. So everything they just shared here is on your calculator. So the next section of this, what you all can do in groups, in your tables, you can kind of go in and change different figures on the calculator. So if you hover over a blue cell and you click on it, a little drop down should appear, and you'll have 4 options. You'll have a 0 and then 3 different numbers which correspond to 2%, 3%, or 4% pay raise. So once you go in and you try different models, you'll see at the very bottom under column Q, you'll see that fund balance number change based on the inputs that you decide on. Is there any questions on this before?
So what we would ask you to do is, we have the opportunity to play with this a little bit so you can see impacts. As you're considering some of these options, you can see impacts, and over in column Q, it tells you impact on budget overall, right? So we just went through a reorganization that led to $23 million in savings for next year. Anything that we add is going to add on top of what we've saved right now, so eliminate some of the savings. But we have to make a decision coming up about what you're interested in for the next round of compensation plan. So this gives us the ability to say, based on this calculation tonight and your input tonight, we have a presentation that we can give to you on Thursday the 4th. Jennifer, Scott, and I all have just a few questions for you in table groups after that, after you play with some things, so that we can gather some input from you, and we'll summarize at the end. And then we'll be able to present to you based on this input on June the 4th, not January 4th, June the 4th. What you're thinking and what we would propose for these raises. Okay.
Calculator's trick. Trying to increase local revenues.
Roberto, will you talk real quickly if what would a group do if, say, they wanted to talk about 1%?
So if the group wanted 1%, we don't have that one called out within the drop-downs. We would just estimate that it would be about half of the 2%. We didn't call it out on here because it wasn't on the presentation.
And we could just type it in manually?
No, I would have to unlock it for you. The password is NR equals funniest.
There's a joke going around, who's the funniest in the central office, and he thinks he is.
I thought I heard you emphasize the word fun and fund balance. Was that it?
Yes. Thank you.
Now you're picking up on Roberto. There we go. So trustees, what we'd ask is ask Roberto questions, Scott questions, Holly's here too, ask questions, play with the tools some. In a few minutes, Jennifer, Scott, and I will get us in some table groups to try and get some input from you and go from there.
Can I ask one overarching question before we get started? So the KPM that's reflected on here is the 23.3 in expenditure reductions that was effectuated by the reorganization that just happened, right?
Correct.
And that gives you, and what?
And by zero-based budgeting, the 2.7 million is a zero-based budget.
Okay, so it totaled 23.3, and that KPM is a 3-year KPM to reduce the structural deficit.
That was the idea behind it. 23 million, 3 years in a row to get to the 70 million structural deficit.
We would not, so essentially to kind of go on like that way though, anything that we add makes the future KPM, if we're going to eliminate the deficit, have to go up, right? Like we can't continue to do 23.3 each year for 3 years, add stuff onto and achieve the KPI within 3 years.
Correct.
Okay, just make sure.
Unfortunately, the answer is you are correct.
And because if you look at columns B and C, there's a row of transfers in, 43,057,000. That is the amount that is sitting in local capital outlay that was built out when surpluses were being saved. So because of that, the next column, column E, is zero. So at this point, it would be exactly what you said. We would be adding to total expenditure.
So whatever we add makes it harder to achieve the KPI in the future.
Yes.
And as of right now, we know that we have the 23 and 23 that we still have to cut, but we don't know how and where it's coming from yet, correct?
Correct. Well, I mean, we're planning as an administrative team, but the finalization of that is entirely. I hate to say it like this, but I'm going to say it like this. Number of people versus pay is where we are. That's a fact. So you all know the graph that Roberto has shared with you on how we're staffed across the Metroplex and according to comparison districts. We have higher pay and we have more staff. And you can't do that and live within a budget right now. So it's going to be up to the board on how we start to address these things moving forward with it.
When we get into table groups, we're going to talk about, because I know you've got, is there a way to look at 5-year and 30-year, or are we still going to consider 0 to 30?
We are absolutely open to anything the board wants to do regarding compensation. So yeah, if the board says, hey, we need a different option on this, this is the time we need that. And that's what we're trying to avoid, coming to you on January 4th and you saying, this doesn't meet our target at all, we need something different, because that messes up the budget process. So tonight's the night to nail those things down on what you need, and our job is to then present you a final comp plan on June 4th. I almost keep saying January, I don't know why.
So to put it simply, any increase means a loss of 8 people.
If you want us to have reduce a budget deficit, absolutely.
And we have no choice but to reduce a budget deficit.
So
Is that putting it too bluntly?
No.
Or too simply?
No, I think that we have to address a budget deficit. I mean, there's only so much money that is there, and you don't want to be one of the districts that's in the headlines right now, I don't think, in Arlington ISD. So we've had a good number of years where we've invested in salaries and benefits, and at the same time, we had very level staffing as we were declining enrollment, and now the board wants us to address that budget deficit. There's got to be decisions made on that.
But raises mean we will cut positions.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, good
times. Do we play right now?
Play. Yes.
Dr. Smith, with the cutting of positions be across the...
Larry does.
Larry does.
Actually, I think Scott's sharing.
Yeah, Scott.
Okay, so the way we prioritized this was teachers increase, all others increase, sped stipend, and then clinic, but all 4 of those didn't make the list. And 2% was the recommendation for teachers, 1% was the recommendation for all others, including the sped stipend at the market rate, which is the 170 that's in there, raising from $3,000 to $3,500 for the stipend. And then the clinic funding, as suggested, that actually is a total cost of $10.5 million, and it leaves your fund balance at 110 days.
Y'all want to go next?
Yes. Sure. So to prioritize the clinic model as number 1, raises is number 2, the stipend for sped at number 3, and then the benefits to number 4, but we specifically wanted to have the benefits added to wellness instead of just added to the general. For raises, we had some conversations about differentiating raises, not based on roles, but for teachers specifically based on numbers and years of experience. And so do you do something different for a 0-year teacher than you do for maybe a more tenured teacher? We talked about minimal for our 0 teachers and our 1 to 3 year, maybe minimum for our 1 to 3 year teachers, and then a little bit more for a teacher that's been teaching for more years. We talked about 1 or 1.5% for admin, and then 2% for everybody else. And for the question, is there anything that should be on the table? We said all these deals.
We are the outlier. Our rank order was stipends, clinic, and benefits. And $335,000 in stipends, the full $2 million in the clinic model, and then debating on the 1.6 for benefits.
And no raises.
That concludes our report.
No raises?
That concludes his report.
What we keep coming back to is the phasing out of positions will only escalate. And that is really difficult to swallow, knowing that we had the teacher retention allotment last year that equated to be about 8%. That's not, none of that is what our staff actually deserves, but they also don't deserve to keep, we're just now phasing out more positions than we even plan to do because we're giving maybe a 2% raise. That's really minimal. It's just the circumstances. We put stipends first because we absolutely think that we need to put the best teachers in front of our students, and it's all students, but our self-contained special education classrooms, we have a lot of openings there that we're not filling, and we need to put qualified educators in those classrooms.
And we did talk about the optics of doing away with positions and losing people, but then giving raises. You know?
It's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah, it's a different, and it's going to be a comfort level and difference in approaches too, because several of the districts that were shown up there and that we've seen in the news that have been giving raises have also been more aggressively letting staff go than
we have.
Well, we haven't let anyone. We've just done the rework, and they've been aggressively doing it, but also doing raises at the same time. So I think we got to talk through what does it look like for us to just say these things are happening, but also we are not going to do any raises in the market where people who are doing the employee moves that we're doing are still doing the same thing. There are also still doing raises. I don't know where I can count on that because to my knowledge, no other district has done it, even the ones who've been aggressively trading staff.
And the hard part for us was they're also not market leading, right? Just a fact. Yeah. You invested over a number of years when they did, and I keep going back to Garland. Garland's investing 4% now, but they're still, after a 4% investment, $3,000 plus less than our starting teacher salary. So, that you all did the work on that prior. So I think that's the part that we're struggling with too, is where you invested in the past, they weren't investing in that same thing.
And I think we would have to emphasize that. We've been above these other districts.
So the goal was to be able to share these out. Obviously, we're not all on the same page, but we kind of wouldn't be either. But it is to get some input. So do you, as trustees, and this is where we need your voice, do you have anything, what things do you need as we present a proposal to you on the 4th of January regarding compensation?
Happy New Year!
It really is. It is a mental block tonight. I apologize.
Everybody's a doctor now. We're
Now we're skipping 6 months ahead.
Yep. One of the things that you need, and this was part of our point of doing this tonight, we know we can't make everybody happy. We can't get everybody in this room exactly on the same page right now, but our job is actually to present to you something to vote on June the 4th. So what recommendations do you have for us as we're putting this proposal together?
It sounds like we're at 0, 1, or 2% on the raises, or some combination of 1 and 2 for teachers versus others? Or my question is with the teacher retention allotment, and where we are in the market, for the teachers we have and employees in general, we still have to face market realities. But we're not in a position where, I'm not comfortable. I was depressed too, doing this model with everything I tried. We ended up below 115 days, which is kind of my bar for the fund balance. And there's just no way to do it. So then it's like, it's a tough call to be sensitive to market realities and still have teachers that feel valued and employees that feel valued and be fiscally responsible at the same time. So those are two very difficult competing constraints. And so how can we be creative to be physical, not end up in the news like the districts that end up in the news today, and still have the kind of district that we're proud of. So I would like to see all options from 0 to 2 and combinations thereof, and cogent arguments for why we want to do teachers differently from other staff possibly.
But we might not make those as administrators. So that's what I'm laying out for you right now, is that I think this is a decision that the board's ultimately going to have to make. We're in a tough spot. You have a key progress measure for me to do, balance our budget, and anything that we do is going to take away from that. And so we're going to present to you some options, but the board's going to ultimately have to come to a decision on those options. And I'll give my recommendations gladly that night, but I don't know I don't know. We're a team, and I don't know where that really falls in the grand scheme of things. Whatever we decide, we got to do it together and make it work over the next year.
Is there going to be a recommendation or one of the options with just the K and O columns? The stipend.
We can absolutely put one together. Like we can put a number of options for you all together, and ultimately it's going to come down to how the board coalesces around one of those that evening. And we're glad to put that together. That's what our group landed on, was the kind of the K, M, and O.
Well, and back to teachers, thinking about the 0 or 1 or 2% raise, whether we did all staff or teachers, if we're phasing out more positions as a result of any compensation raise, that is going to impact the employee satisfaction, because more will be put on our teachers' shoulders on the day-to-day, the more employees that we have to phase out positions for, typically. Most of our employees are teachers. And even if we do other strategies that are not on the spreadsheet, like increase class sizes, all of these things can be cost saving, but typically a teacher is going to also consider their job satisfaction and how valued they feel and what the demand is on the day-to-day in a very already high-stress job, high-stakes job, instead of just, did I get 3% instead of 2%? And I just think that's really important to keep in mind, just like the whole picture, not just, was it 2% or 3% this year? And I wish we could do it all. But again, if we did a 4% raise this time, that completely erases the phasing out of positions we just did. Sorry, the reorganization. But that's not even in addition to all the other things that we want to do and we put as our first and second priority. So that's really tough.
So what I'm hearing so far is that you would still like to see multiple options and what that is. I'm hearing a 0%, a 0% with columns K, M, and O, and a 1% and a 2% is what you want to be able to look at on the fourth.
But also splitting the 2 and 1
between different job groups.
Other job groups you would put together, so I would keep teachers and administrators together, or I would keep auxiliary with, like, if we're gonna differentiate, we talked about that.
Can I ask a question that I haven't heard us talk about before? Is we talked about the years of teachers 0 through 5 and all that. Is there any way to look at staff as a whole? If a bus driver's in here 0 through 5 or 20 plus, is there a way to look at staff as a whole with tenure?
I'd have to.
With tenure or tenure?
Tenure.
So like, just people that have been here for a number of years. Let's just focus on that.
So the way that, a couple things, the way that the compensation models work today is for years, and we've made good progress. As you've been here longer, you make more money. So, and you saw even on the teacher graph up there that the 5-year increments were very consistent on the line up and to the right. The typical breakout, when there has been a breakout between we want to give one group one thing and one group another, is it's typically been as straightforward as teachers and non-teachers, and not differentiating further. What TASB showed us tonight, and they help us with every year, is they make sure that we're market competitive, and it may have gone too quickly, but he was talking about targeted adjustments. Targeted adjustments mean TASB looks at this, they do it every year and says, hey, these are a little off and I need to fix these, and these are a little off and I need to fix these. So that's built in or baked into the process. If the modifications happen in any 5-year increment, or we decide we're going to do this group and not that group, what will happen to that line up and to the right is it'll start to look more like a roller coaster, and it'll be embedded for perpetuity. And the first year it won't feel too bad, but the second and third years will be, how come we're doing that? And that's, we have had to deal with that in the past.
I just wondered, because we have looked at, we say teachers who are 16 plus get X amount. Well, what about bus drivers who have been here 16? And do we value them the same way we value? That was just a thought I had. I was just curious.
The other thing about teachers that's unique is teachers get credit for any year in the state of Texas teaching, where I don't know if, when we look at bus drivers, if I had driven a bus in another district and came here, I don't know how that works with TRS or any of those kinds of things, but this isn't just years of experience in Army, it's years of experience.
Totality.
And I certainly don't mean to be diminishing the suggestion, I'm just trying to share the context.
No, I just wanted to ask, I appreciate it.
Going back to Jennifer's question on groupings of employees, in our charts and stuff, we had teachers, support staff, administrative professionals, technology, administrative support, educational aides, and auxiliary. Are there any groups that you would say, okay, if you're putting this together and we want to say, you want to do 2% for teachers and 1% for everybody else, or 3% for, are there any groupings of those job groups that you want us to specifically look at?
I'm okay with just teachers and then everybody else.
Okay.
On this chart, I would also break out admin.
Teachers and admin.
And then everybody else is together.
Okay. Holly and Scott and Roberto, are there any questions that you all have for our trustees as we're getting ready to prepare for June 4th?
This has been very helpful. I know there's hard decisions, but it's been helpful to have insights and thoughts to consider as we're trying to put together some alternative recommendations for you all to decide on. Sorry.
You say you didn't have anything.
No, I do not.
Great. Trustees, anything else for us as an administrative team?
I just want to say thank you. This was a really useful tool, and it put things in all these different scenarios and gave us the on-the-spot perspective with each scenario. And I was surprised what the numbers did in a lot of cases. And if we didn't have this side by side, and it, you know, it updated what the budget implications would be, I just don't see how we would have had that same perspective. So thank you so much. This was
a lot of work in this.
Yes, I love that we got the information up front and then we got to play and see what the budget implications would be.
This is a very, very useful format for a workshop, especially when we're dealing with something with such gravity, and that we as trustees should never take lightly. So this was a way for us to really dig in and really give it the attention it deserves. So thank you. I got something for you afterwards.
Larry's trying to jump in.
I'll just wait. Will the recommendations show the impact to the deficit and then the fund balance within days? Is that possible?
Yes.
Oh, for the.
Yeah,
For June 4th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we show that?
Yeah, we'll work together, we'll put it together. So we'll have this document, I guess, a couple of different times with the different options.
Okay.
And with that, I think there was a chart somewhere that I saw that had how our peer group districts, how many days of fund balance they carry.
Oh yeah.
So I think we hopefully keep it in perspective. That in perspective when we look at this number, because in my mind, 190 days, 120 days, 130 days, like it's just days. But seeing what other folks are doing, I think is awesome.
I think that's important too, because David said something earlier. You know, just to be clear, our local policy says what for fund balance?
25 days, 25%, which is 90 days.
Okay.
The first rating for TA is it hovers at around 75 days.
Okay.
ISD start getting in trouble when they're under 50, and they definitely need payroll loans when they're at 1 month.
But just to be clear, to stay above our local policy, we need more than 90 days. David mentioned 115, like, it's better to have more. But also when we compare it to some of those other districts, we have to keep in mind what TEA's recommendation is and what our local policy is.
But then also knowing that it's going to take us 2 more years to correct this deficit. And so we're going, oh, well, let's manage down to 90. Well, that's not going to, correct. No, that 90 is going to shrink really fast. It accelerates once you go under 90. So.
One question, Roberto. You said like this is if everything stays the same with these formulas. Are we going to, you know how when we go like 90 or more days without filling a vacant position, we've been more timely about phasing those unfilled positions out? Is that cadence taken into account with these numbers? Or are we going to be more aggressive about that moving forward, and that would be cost saving, and we're not seeing that here?
For the purpose of the tool, the static example was just no change.
No change at all.
Right. For the purpose of next year, the idea is to kind of keep those positions, keep that practice that we have in place for departments. We started doing that earlier in the semester.
Okay.
So all of those strategies, remember, no matter what you add, we have to still employ those strategies that we employed this last year and more to get the next phase.
And I do want to throw one disclaimer, right? So the demographer, as part of the budget parameters that were adopted, we went with the low projection. That Sanders number, that didn't include anything with vouchers, right? Because that data is barely being surfaced. So that's the number that HR used for staffing, for teachers as well, right? So the idea is that we try to have, as you lose enrollment, you're losing classroom teachers naturally. Those you want to try to keep together. If one drops faster than the other one, then administratively we have to find that somewhere else. So it is, that number is a growing target.
Any other questions from the trustees today?
Were Zonda's numbers different from the folks tonight?
They were about the 10-year, I'd have to look at the annual projections, the 10-year projection, excuse me, 10-year projection was about the same. The thing that with PASA tonight, they showed you how it could dip a lot lower. That was the thing that I don't think it was really pointed out in the ZOMNA. Everybody good? Do we need the fun guy to tell a joke before we?
Yes.
Because
Let's go, Funyun.
Don't do it to me.
I heard Funyun on the spot.
We'd have to we would have to earn his respect back with all of you probably with that joke. So.
Wow, okay. So just read it out, we're not gonna.
Yeah, we're good. No,
Okay, perfect. Okay, so seeing no more discussion or jokes, we're gonna go ahead and adjourn this workshop at 8:55 p.m. Oh, yeah.